Hello, the program is Stanley History Man, and I'm your host, Dr. Stanley Sandler. Today I want to talk about Vietnam, basically what went wrong in Vietnam. And there are some things that are very obvious, and we were even aware of at the time, such as Vietnam is a heavily jungled country, okay? Easy for guerrillas and terrorists and so on to operate. Also, with a border with an unfriendly country, China. Okay, two big problems right there. But other ones are just as serious, and again, we didn't seem to be too aware of them. One is that Vietnam had a very strong nationalistic feeling. They had fought against the Chinese for centuries. China never really completely conquered them, but they had to be, in some cases, under Chinese, not sovereignty, but sort of a subordinate kingdom to China. All right, and several times they broke out into open revolt against the Chinese. And then, as you know, there was a long war against the French. The French took over Vietnam in the 19th century, and then a serious guerrilla warfare against the French broke out in 1945 and went on until 1954, and then Vietnam was divided. And we made a commitment to defend South Vietnam, which was gave North Vietnam to the communists, and South Vietnam was to be an anti-communist country. Of course, the guerrilla warfare did not end in Vietnam with the peace agreements of 1954. And this is where I think one of the basic problems of Vietnam took place, which you don't read very much about. And that is that the Defense Department got increasingly into the hands of what they call defense intellectuals. These were people often from Harvard, particularly Harvard Law School, and they were believers in the doctrine of limited force, of wargaming, as it was called, wargaming. Like war is a game. And there were a lot of very abstruse articles and studies made on this wargaming. And the idea was you just find out how much pressure you put upon an enemy before he's ready to give in to your basic demands. And you know your demands are not unreasonable. So it's a kind of, even Stephen works something out, and nothing as vulgar as victory. Well, these people, Secretary of Defense McNamara was an early adherent, and there's another one behind the scenes operator, who I call McNamara's McNamara, John McNaughton. McNaughton was, of course, a dean of the Harvard Law School, very expert on, of course, defense matters. And that was the policy they followed, that we put limited pressure upon North Vietnam, and they'd stop causing trouble in South Vietnam. There are even cases where our Air Force and bombing missions saw new anti-aircraft emplacements being put up around Hanoi in North Vietnam, and they said, we got to take these emplacements out. They even had to ask the White House if they could take it out, and they were overruled. They said, no, that might be a little too much force. We can bomb them here and there, maybe on odd or even days, but let's not go overboard and knock out their aircraft guns. So a number of American airmen either lost their lives or wound up for a long, long stay in the Hanoi Hilton because of these defense intellectuals. And our goals were, what were our goals? Dean Rusk, the sort of Buddha-like, impregnable Secretary of State, said, well, our goal in Vietnam is to stop them, the other side, from doing what they're doing and from what they know they're doing. Now, that's enough to make your heart beat faster and to sacrifice your son in Vietnam. The other, sort of to add the icing to the cake idiocy of the Vietnam War, draftee army. So you're sending young kids who couldn't get into college, had college draft exemptions then, to fight in a war that even the Secretary of State couldn't enunciate really why we were there. And they just kept piling it on. First of all, of course, as we know, the Army was always fighting last war, World War II, just kill a lot of the enemy. So they had body counts, and he did kill a lot of North Vietnamese, and then, of course, the Viet Cong. And I would say this, certainly, our military performed magnificently. There were very few military blunders. The war itself was a blunder, but our men fought very well. 50,000 of them died. And in this misbegotten war. But here you have a war fought by defense intellectuals who can't even really explain why we're fighting, and then they send in draftee armies to fight in a heavily jungled country with a strong desire for independence. And this is maybe the biggest factor on our loss, the biggest drag, the biggest weight we had against the United States. And that is that if we won this war, and the South Vietnamese, of course, they're fighting too, much higher casualties than we had. If we and the South Vietnamese won, Vietnam remained divided. If they won, it was united. Now, a lot of Vietnamese say, look, I'm not a communist, but these guys are fighting for something we have fought for centuries. the independence of Vietnam. And Vietnam was distinct from China. Different language, not radically different, but different customs, different culture, even different food. You have Vietnamese restaurants, you have Chinese restaurants, there's difference. But again, we sort of thought, well, we're going to, American technology will help, of course, but the main thing was just that we'll get the Vietnamese to fight. And so many of the Vietnamese thought, if you guys win, my country remains divided. So a lot of anti-communist or uncommunist people Vietnamese were just not all that sold on our cause, our cause. And so eventually it did all fall apart. We were never defeated. The Americans were never defeated in Vietnam, but we finally just had to get out. Of course, the other thing is the publicity, the world's first television war. But had we been winning, then television would have described our successes. But the biggest thing was that we were fighting to keep Vietnam divided. But all these other factors, and it's kind of scary to think about that this war was fought by defense intellectuals, by college professors. And to think, let's hope that from now on we will not have any of that kind of repetition again. We'll have defense wars fought by the military with overriding, of course, governance by the civilian authority, the separation of military and civilian, which we got from the British. Well, that's it. Stan the History Man. Thank you for watching.